folks, Josh Knight the First here with another episode of Write or Rebuild, coming to you with episode 35 of the series. Let's get right into it. Now, I know I say that every week, let's get right into it. What are we getting into this week? Hell. Basically hell. Everything that could have gone wrong for everybody goes wrong in this episode. I know we've been plotting through the series, and it's kind of getting a little bit repetitive just how easy it is for Evolt to stay on top, and this week it's kind of more of the same, but very final, and we're only at episode 35. We've got at least another 10, maybe 12, 13 episodes to go in this series, but it feels like endgame right now. So from last week's episode, we see that Ryuga has been re-merged with Evolt. As we found out last week, they're both part of the same entity, and we get a little bit more explanation on that here in just a second, but now Ryuga is essentially a bad guy, or at least he's being possessed by a bad guy. Now, I know I was thinking last week that, well, I guess we've seen the last of Isurugi. Apparently not. Isurugi's body has basically been left for dead there at the scene of the alleged crime, and he's in a coma for the better part of the series. Now, will he actually come back and talk and speak and have a role? We don't know. I imagine they're not done with that actor yet, since we haven't seen him get his flowers yet. So for right now, it's safe to say that Isurugi is not on the field, but he could still be in play later on. Now again, much like last week, we've only really got two fights in this episode, one here at the very beginning and one at the very end, which is a little bit more extended, of course for the purposes of storytelling. So now that Evolt has rebonded with Ryuga, he's making his move for Pandora's box, since he basically has just about everything he needs. Now Sento, having been cured of the venom from last episode, does go ahead and transform into Build to go ahead and combat him, but really this ends up in a giant plot dump for all the stuff he wasn't aware of, but everybody else had already been filled in on. Now the plot dump actually gives me more questions than I had originally about Evolt. So apparently in times long ago, he and the part of him that eventually became Ryuga did destroy Mars, and they waited for the probe to show up. Now when the probe came back, it of course came back with the part of Evolt that eventually became Ryuga, specifically because he was looking for another planet to destroy. In that sense, he's kind of like the aliens from just about any movie you've ever seen, specifically for me, Independence Day, where they take on potentially a planet's resources and then move on. At least for me, I would assume that that would be the motivation behind Evolt's actions, or he could just plain like destroying planets. He also reveals that Ryuga, when he was born, lost all memory of ever being a part of Evolt, so that has been dormant this whole time. And this whole time since coming back inside Isurugi's body, Evolt has been working behind the scenes to make sure, one, that he could get the Evolt driver working again, and two, that he could get Ryuga to eventually reach level 5.0 hazard level so that he could reform with him. Now he does also state that, as was previously mentioned, Shinobu Katsuragi, which would be essentially Sento's father, did help him work on the Evolt driver, but apparently felt a ton of guilt as a result of this, and that may be the reason behind why he committed suicide. Now he doesn't outright say, "I pushed your father to suicide," but he just leaves it at probably, meaning he doesn't really care whether or not his actions resulted in somebody else's death. In fact, he's pretty fine with that. On top of that, we see that Sento clearly is no match for Evolt, but at this point it doesn't matter, because even then he has to remind him, "Why do you think you're even cured of the venom anyway? I still have plans for you." Really, if I didn't know what the format of this series was and that eventually the good guys have to win, I would be kind of worried at this point in that, oh, we might be getting the bad ending already here in episode 35. But we know this has to go somewhere, but again, it has to get a lot worse before it gets better. Now, since we see that both Sento and Isurugi are out of commission for the better part of the episode, Misora still has to deal with this on a deep emotional level, because she's the only one that we have left to see that lens from, because of course everybody else has either been incapacitated or taken over. Now, even though she's dealing with the weight of all this, we do still need the comedy to balance that out, and that is so superbly done by Kazumi. We see that the relationship is still a little bit strained in that they only refer to each other by their nickname, Kazumi referring to her as Mitan, and Misora referring to him as just Grease. The entire bit there of him just trying to figure out how to put his arm around her to comfort her is incredibly hilarious, and I find that really necessary here in this episode. We see that he almost got there and had the most epic floating hand you've ever seen, but unfortunately Sento woke up and he had to play it off. Now, will the relationship develop any further? I would actually like it to, but before we get into that relationship, we actually see a little bit more about the relationship between Sento and Ryuga. Now, we see that displayed in the fact that Sento last episode, while the venom was still coursing through his veins, could hear Ryuga in his kind of stupor, and he took it as kind of a dream message from him, but of course Kazumi has to tell him, no, that was real, he said all that about you. Now, the way they're relating to each other is a very strong bond, and I can see how easy it would be for some fans to ship them together. Really, it's kind of obvious that they kind of want the audience to see it that way. Now, you wouldn't be pushing this so hard if there wasn't going to be some sort of payoff later. We're not going to get that in this episode, but I see that we're really starting to build up this relationship between just how much Sento relies on Ryuga to balance him out and vice versa. Now, for a second, things don't seem exactly that grim. There's still one full bottle that Evolt doesn't have in his possession yet, and that happens to be the Phoenix full full bottle. Now, who happens to have this? It would be Gentoku, who, as we all remember, is still grieving from the loss of his father a couple of episodes ago at the hands of Evolt. Now, unfortunately, we don't dwell on him too long. I just wish we'd gotten a little bit more into a look in his mind at this point, where he's starting to realize, you know what, I have to come clean about my motives. Yeah, I was willing to play the bad guy, but I'm feeling remorseful. I kind of feel like I've been a hypocrite this far, and I kind of want to see what I can do to fix things. Now, whether he can pick up on this or not, Sento still has to offer a branch to him saying, hey, look, we need your power, we need that full bottle to not fall into Evol's hands, let's go ahead and team up. But unfortunately, before we can get any sort of agreement, Evolt shows up again. Now, it was one thing talking about this for the last couple of episodes that Evolt really has an advantage as far as advanced planning, but here we're seeing now that he's met up with Ryuga and bonded with him, he seems to have all of these different powers that we didn't see before. Now, he's got telekinesis, he's got teleportation, camouflage, super speed, he's basically unstoppable. He's already quite easily the perfect life form. Perfect in almost all aspects except for lip sync. Even though we see now that Ryuga is having to play that part now, acting for lines that are being spoken for somebody else, he doesn't quite have the same lip flap movement that's matching as well as when Isurugi was being possessed by Evolt. Now yes, he does show up to whisk everybody away to the final battle of the episode, which could potentially be the final battle of the series if you ask me, which takes place inside Pandora's Tower. At this point, he's got all of the full bottles that he needs, and at some point, Pandora's Tower is going to rise up to where it's supposed to go. Now this whole time, Nanba has been eating out of Evol's hand. When Evolt tells him that, hey, I'm actually the ultimate weapon you're looking for, I still have allegiances to you, buddy, he still buys it. He still thinks he can win under these circumstances, and eventually when he does see that, hey, I am actually about to get screwed, he sends out Utsumi to get punched in the face, which I'm actually thankful for. Now this does lead into our last fight, of course, of the episode, which is Evolt versus Build, Grease, and Rogue. Now at some point they each try their individual special attacks on him with differing amounts of success. Grease's Rider Kick is kind of brushed off and he kind of falls back pretty hard. Rogue tries his kick and it actually pushes him back a little bit further, but unfortunately both were taken out, and Evolt clearly is playing for keeps. He's aiming for belts. He wants to disable them now. And we see that on top of that, Evolt is still into playing mind games. He doesn't pay Grease any mind, he just knocks him out, you know, blasting off again like he's a part of Team Rocket. And then before he does that to Gentoku, he calls him out on his hypocrisy for all of his actions up to this point in the series. Now going into the fight specifically one-on-one with Build, he's still pushing this idea of saying, oh, war is inevitable, if I didn't show up, your kind still would have fought. He even goes so far as to say the thing that you trust in most, Sento, science, is the thing that eventually leads to war. I'm going to pick apart the very things that make you you. He's really going for the gut here. It's not enough for him to win, he has to hurt you. Now to his credit, Sento does seem to be fighting back, thinking outside the box, and actually doing something I wasn't expecting, which was going back to base hazard forms. We see him use two of them here that we hadn't really seen much of before, which is Pirate Train Hazard and the newer combination of Dragon Key Hazard. And even more to Sento's credit, we see that he actually lasted in the hazard forms for a full 2 minutes before he could sense that he was losing control and then switched back to Tank. So he's actually thinking more strategically than he has previously, and he lasted a lot longer in battle. Now as far as the war with words is concerned, he's battling back against Evolt, saying that science is there to prevent things that happened in the past from happening again. That's the whole reason that science exists, as far as he's concerned. Unfortunately, Evolt really isn't having this, and he pulls another mind game out of his hat, in that he fakes that he's actually Ryuga trying to struggle to break free, but he only uses this to get another cheap shot on Sento. And with that last attack, unfortunately, the Rider Pinata syndrome does take effect. Sento drops all of his bottles, giving Evolt every last bottle that he needs. He's placing all of these panels onto Pandora's box, and the tower raises up, and it's looking more and more like the vision that Misora sees when she tries to use the bracelet to transmute things. And that's where the episode ends. It's ending on a very dour note. As far as we know, the preview from last week told the truth. The world is ending. But somehow we will continue, because next week we see a preview that shows Vernage isn't exactly dead and will try to give Sento some kind of power to go ahead and beat Evolt before he actually achieves more power. At this point, what more power could he need? So yes, if I didn't know any better, I would tell everybody, hey, let's pack it in, this series is done, our heroes have lost, there's really nothing more that can be done. And really, the way they've built this up, they really need to figure out how exactly they're going to beat back Evolt from having so much of an advantage over our heroes here. Not only has he beaten them psychologically, not only has he beaten them physically, he's taken over the area they live in. There's nothing really left for them. Which brings me to the point that I hope the series is trying to make. really it's that old saying that it's darkest before dawn, and right now things couldn't be any darker. The world is literally about to end in front of their eyes, so we need the hero to be that shining light and bring people hope, and hopefully that hope will be Build in this case. But those of course are my thoughts on the episode. I want to hear what you guys thought in the comments below, so let's go ahead and talk about a few things. First off, Evolt. Now that he's been reunited with Ryuga, do you think he's a little too OP being able to teleport and camouflage himself? Secondly, Isurugi. Now that he's been freed of Evolt's control, do you think he will remain free for the rest of the series, or he'll get repossessed at some point? And thirdly, Misora and Sawatari. Do you think that they should eventually end up in a relationship together, or it's fine with them being a little tenuous against each other? You tell me in the comments below. And of course, during the week, you can always talk to me over on social media. On Twitter, I'm at JoshKnight1st. This has been episode 35 of Writer Rebuild. For episode 35 of Kamen Rider Build, Tower of Destruction, I'm Josh Knight the First. I'll see you guys again next episode.